Hey YouTube, this is David Matthew Walker, and this is a video summary of the fifth chapter of my book, The Theory of God Relativity. The chapter is entitled God and His Enemies. So, to summarize, my theory is that the substance of life is determined by its position relative to God. Last chapter, we dwelled in the subject of God Himself. This chapter, we're going to deal with negative positioning relative to Him. Right? So, we've come to learn that God is loving and good, and basically all the virtuous, he has virtuous characteristics. So, with that said, where do things like malice and greed and murder and all this evil come from, right? If God's good, right? So, some people will say that, well, all of this comes within God's nature, right? But the reality of the situation is that if God was both good and evil, or if he was both good and evil, he would basically tear himself apart. Now, this isn't good and evil don't come together in harmony like the harmonic tensions that we went over, last chapter. Him being infinitely evil and infinitely good at the same time, it wouldn't make any sense. He wouldn't be able to exist, because that disharmony would tear him apart, essentially, right? So dualistic views of God aren't really valid, and the only way that God could have evil in his person could work in a pantheistic view of God, right? And pantheism is essentially, the belief that everything is God, right? So the reason why we're not using pantheism in this particular model, or in my theory, is because I can't think of a coherent theory to form around a pantheistic God, because God's everything, and we see there's observable change in life. That would mean that God's always changing, and if God was always changing, that would mean God is never internally stable. If God's never internally stable, how did He create life? See, it's kind of like an ongoing issue that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold its weight. And if God was, as opposed to being infinitely good, which that's what I posit His nature is, according to the Bible, He's infinitely good. If He was not infinitely good, if He was rather infinitely evil, right? So we've crossed out Him being infinitely good and evil, crossed out Him being everything, right? If He was infinitely evil, there would be no ordered structure in the world, right? The world would be complete chaos, and I know the world can be chaotic, but we've got laws of physics that hold life together, right? There's structure and order in life. If He was infinitely evil, that wouldn't exist. It would be torment for everybody, for all the time, regardless of what they did, regardless of whatever, right? So He can't be infinitely evil. The other version of God that we're going to just get rid of right now, to solidify our monotheistic personal God perspective that we're adopting here, is the idea of there being multiple gods. Now, if there were multiple gods, essentially what would happen is there would constantly be chaos, because if you have multiple gods in control of multiple things, there's always going to be a conflict. And the fact that we have order, we have structure that doesn't change, indicates the fact that no, there couldn't be multiple gods, because if we did, there wouldn't be that consistency of order that we are able to observe in the natural world, right? And if you had multiple gods, in order to attain that order, one of the gods would have to be the superior god. And if you had one god that was superior over the other gods wouldn't really be gods at all. They would, be non-creator deities at most. And any non-creator deity is actually irrelevant, and you can't really compare a non-creator deity to the God, the deity that created everything or everybody, right? So dualism, pantheism, polytheism, they're all invalid. Deism is nothing more than a construction of human thought, because we went over this in the second chapter, but just to add to that, if there was a deistic God, nobody would have knowledge of a deistic God, because you would just let creation go and nobody would know. So therefore, a deistic God is nothing more than a creation in somebody's mind. And a creation in somebody's mind cannot be the God, because God would transcend a human thought, right? So that's kind of like, anyways, I know I've kind of gone off the topic a bit, but I did kind of cover these things because there's this idea that I've noticed in Western philosophy, and and other cultures too, where God has this evil nature, but it doesn't hold its weight, because if God had this evil nature, we wouldn't have order the way that we are able to observe it, right? So the reason why evil exists is because God allows measure of free will that allows it to exist. So even though he is all powerful, he allows free will, right? So he allows a divergence from his optimal will, right? So because free will exists, evil has to exist, because Murphy's law. Anything can go wrong, will go wrong. If there's free will, then it's inevitably, whoever has free will is going to inevitably use that free will to rebel against God, and that's when evil is going to be created, because to diverge from God's will is to diverge from everything that's good, everything that's holy, everything that's pure, everything that's loving. You're going the opposite direction, right? So that's where evil comes from, and we don't really have that many details on how evil was created, but it's pretty reasonable to assume that evil came from a being called Lucifer, or Satan, the devil. In Western society, we tend to not believe in a devil. It's like, oh, a fairy tale, but that's he likes it when you don't believe it, because that's a part of his deception. Like The Usual Suspects. Where the greatest trick he ever pulled was leading the world to believe that he doesn't exist. Right? That's a big part of his operations, is him being kind of invisible behind the scenes, where you don't really know that he's there. Right? So, the big point that I wanted to kind of he's no, actually, I'm sorry, before I get into, there is a point of this chapter that I really wanted to delve into, but before I get into that, he is the okay. So because of his rebellion, God in his judgment judged him to eternal fire. Now this is very important. Hell, it was created for the devil and those that followed the devil, right? So it makes sense, because he placed himself in negative positioning relative to God, and if God is fire, then negative positioning relative to fire is going to be hell, right? It makes sense. So that wasn't a fate that was designed for humanity. That was a fate that was designed for the devil, right? So let's keep this in mind as we proceed. So the main concept that I wanted to get into in this particular chapter is the fact that evil itself kind of operates. First, for the most part, evil operates on a perpetrator and victim dynamic, right? So you have a perpetrator of evil and you have a victim of evil, and the evil itself kind of flows like energy, right? Because if you have a perpetrator of evil, the victim has to either absorb their evil, right? Just to take it in and don't do anything about it, or they're going to project it outwards and be evil towards others, and then the cycle will continue, between another victim and perpetrator, or they're going to take that evil and tap it into their selfishness, and in selfishness, there's collateral damage to others around you because you're esteeming your desire as more important than the well-being of another, right? So there's there's other evils, things that God considers evil. Now remember, not remember, but evil in and of itself is characteristics that are contrary to God's nature, right? So if God has a loving nature, evil is going to have a hateful nature, right? If God is patient, then evil is going to be impatient and intolerant. You know what I'm saying? Like, if God is humble through his son, who always obeys his father, then evil is going to be full of pride. You get what I'm saying? So that's kind of how evil works, right? So most evil, not all evil, but most evil works between a perpetrator and a victim. Now, evil things that God considers evil, things that are unholy, that don't necessarily have a victim, they go against the order that he's established for his creation. And we will get into that later on, but not in this particular chapter, right? So I have in the chapter like a paradigm where I set up evil as elements, and they combine together to form molecules, and there's basically, it's kind of like they act like there's chemical reactions. Like, if you project evil at somebody, then that person is going to, that evil is going to fester within them, and it doesn't just go away with the person. It affects others, right? So I don't really want to get into all the. Actually, no, I will. I'll get into one of the examples, so that way, you kind of get a feel for why I use this particular paradigm. We'll use an evil that I know I have a lot of experience with, racism, right? So, in racism, we have pride, strife, oppression. Oppression is actually a molecule. So pride is an element, an evil element. These are evil elements in my paradigm here. Pride's an element, strife's an element. Oppression is a molecule, because to get oppression, you need cruelty and corruption, right? So those things are added together for racism. And racism can vary from circumstance to circumstance. But in this particular example, insecurity is a part of the racism. So insecurity is a molecule that you get from fear and misery, right? So when this is projected at the victim, the victim then has their own insecurity, their own fear and misery, plus the element of rage, wrath, and despair, right? So a victim of the evil of racism may, get angry, and they may, take it out on their families or a stranger, and it could lead to wrath, that could lead them to run into murderous rants, right? So that's just an example. Like evil works like the conservation of energy. It's not created or destroyed, but it only transforms from one form to another. That's kind of how evil works. Like since its inception through the devil's divergence from God's will, you can't get rid of it. It just bounces from one place to the other, right? So there's entire systems that are built on evil. Systemic racism, systematic racism, institutionalized racism. There's entire groups of people that run into these cycles that cause evil to go on and on and on and on, right? Because you can't get rid of evil with evil, and evil only breeds evil, right? So this concept is important to understand, because we need to understand why God does what he does later on, right? because you can't just get rid of evil. It's not like, ooh, you just have a happy place and evil just goes away. It's not how that works. It's like energy. Like it has to go somewhere, right? So it's evident that evil has cycled through humanity for forever, right? Look at all the atrocities even to this day, right? So we shouldn't be. You know what? Never mind. I'm not going to get into that. I'll cut this video short for now. There's really much else. That was really the main point I wanted to get out of this was how you can use a paradigm to model these as elements and molecules. You could probably use a different one, and you'll get the same result. Like if you take those evil things and you kind of see how they would work when you're interacting with real people in real situations, you'll find out that it's like energy, right? So at any rate, if you feel enriched by this video or any of my other videos, I'd ask that you please support me by purchasing my book. I'll have a link to my site in the description. Until then, see you next video.